I never thought I'd post this story online, but after seeing similar ones, I figured writing it all out might help me process everything. And maybe someone else going through family issues could relate. So here goes. I'm Brady, 26 now, but this story starts when I was 17, during junior year of high school. I wasn't the perfect son my parents hoped for. My dad worked in a manufacturing plant, and my mom was a receptionist. We weren't wealthy, but we lived pretty comfortably in our small town. They had my whole future mapped out. Get good grades, go to the same state university my dad did, marry a nice local girl, have a couple of kids, and live out their version of the American dream. The problem? I hated school. Not because I wasn't smart, I actually got decent grades when I tried, but because I have ADHD, though I didn't know it until later. Sitting through hours of lectures on things I didn't care about was unbearable. What I did enjoy was working with my hands, building things, fixing stuff. When I was 15, I spent a whole summer helping our neighbor Judah fix up his garage. It was the first time I felt like I was actually good at something. My parents didn't approve. Every time I mentioned doing construction or learning a trade, my mom looked like I'd said I wanted to become a garbage collector. My dad would go on about wasted potential, insisting that we weren't the kind of people who worked with their hands. I think they just cared about appearances. They wanted to tell their friends about their college grad son, not a blue-collar worker. Things had been tense for a while. I was working part-time at a store and quietly saving money, because deep down, I had a feeling I'd need it. My grades were slipping because I just didn't care anymore. Every dinner turned into a fight about college, or how I was throwing my future away. The breaking point came in April, 6 weeks before graduation. I'd been accepted to the state university, mostly because my parents filled out the application for me. But I'd also been looking into a construction trade program. It was cheaper, shorter, and focused on real-world skills. I even got a partial scholarship thanks to a portfolio of projects I'd built. I decided to tell them over dinner. Huge mistake. The second I brought up the trade school, my dad threw his fork so hard it bounced off his plate. My mom started crying like I told her I had a terminal illness. That dinner turned into the worst fight we'd ever had. My dad called me ungrateful and said I was disrespecting everything they'd done for me. My mom just kept saying she didn't understand where they went wrong. When I tried to explain why I was passionate about the trade program, my dad cut me off and said, "No son of mine is going to waste his life like that. If you're too stupid to see the opportunity you're throwing away, maybe you're not the son we thought you were." I lost it. I told them I was tired of living for their dream, that I was almost an adult and could make my own choices, and that they never really listened to what I wanted. We were all screaming. I said things I regret. They said worse. Finally, my dad told me if I wasn't going to follow their rules, I could leave. I don't think he expected me to call his bluff, but I did. I went upstairs and grabbed the emergency bag I'd already packed. I told you, I had a feeling. I stuffed in whatever clothes I could, grabbed my laptop, the $200 I'd saved, and my documents, birth certificate, social security card. Thank God for my paranoia. When I came back down, they looked shocked, like they didn't think I'd really go. My mom tried to guilt me. "You're making a huge mistake," and "You think you know everything at 17. My dad just stood there, arms crossed. As I walked out, my mom shouted, "You'll be back begging in a month. You have no idea how hard the real world is," with this cruel smirk on her face. My dad didn't say a word, just slammed the door behind me. I stood on the lawn, stunned. It started to rain, like something out of a movie. I remember thinking, well, this is some dramatic crap. I called my friend Corey, whose parents were actual decent people. The next few days were a blur. Corey's family let me crash on their couch, but I knew I couldn't stay forever. I still had school, I needed to graduate, and I had to figure out how to survive. I'd have moments where I'd just freeze and think, holy crap, I'm homeless. I'd have panic attacks in school bathrooms. But what kept me going was pure anger. There was no way I was going to prove my parents right by crawling back. Corey's mom helped me apply for emergency aid because I was technically an unaccompanied minor. My school guidance counselor, one of the few adults who actually listened, helped me work toward legal emancipation. I picked up more hours at my job and got another washing dishes at a diner. The hardest part wasn't even the logistics, it was emotional. Watching classmates hang out with their families, hearing them complain about small fights with their parents who still loved them, it stung. It took me a while to realize my situation wasn't normal. Most parents don't kick their kid out for wanting a different path. Most don't make love feel like a reward you have to earn. About 3 weeks after I left, my mom texted me, not to apologize, but to say when you're ready to apologize and accept our help on our terms, you can come home. I didn't respond. A week later, my dad left a voicemail saying the same thing. They were so convinced I'd fail. They were just waiting to say I told you so. I graduated while still living at Corey's. My parents showed up to the ceremony. For appearances, but I walked right past them. By June, I'd saved enough to move into a crappy apartment with 2 other guys. It was a dump, but it was mine. I started the trade program, working almost full-time to pay for it. It was brutal, but every time I wanted to quit, I thought of my mom's smirk and my dad's silence. That first year was the hardest of my life. I was exhausted, scared, and lonely. There were nights I cried myself to sleep. Mornings I couldn't find the strength to get out of bed. But I always did, and I never went back, not after a month. Not ever. This is getting long, so I'll post part 2 tomorrow if people are interested. That's when things started to turn around. But it was a long road. Edit. Wow, didn't expect this to blow up. Thanks for the support. Part 2 coming. Soon. Update 1. Thanks again for all the kind words. Didn't think so many people would relate. Anyway, picking up from where I left off, those first few months on my own were rough. One of my roommates was this guy Marcus who worked nights, so I barely saw him. The other was Tyler, who I'm pretty sure was dealing something. But he kept to himself and paid rent on time, so I didn't care. The apartment had roaches that would practically wave at you when you flipped the kitchen light on. The shower would randomly turn ice cold right in the middle of rinsing. Nothing like screaming while shampoo's running into your eyes. And the walls were so thin, I knew way too much about our neighbors' relationship problems. But the thing was, it was mine. Or at least a third mine. No one could throw me out as long as I paid rent. I was juggling 2 miserable jobs, working evenings at a hardware store and weekends at a diner. Between that and trying to finish trade school, I was lucky if I slept 4 hours a night. My diet was mostly ramen, eggs, and leftover pancakes or fries from the diner. I lost about 20 pounds those first few months, and probably looked like a zombie most of the time. The weirdest part was seeing Instagram posts from other kids my age. College parties, family vacations, just normal stuff, while I was trying to figure out if I could skip doing laundry another week because the laundromat needed quarters and I needed those quarters for the bus. My parents reached out a few times, but it was always the same message. When was I going to stop being stubborn and come home? Their help came with strings. Follow their rules, live their plan. Not once did they ask if I was okay. Like, your teenage son is living in a bug-infested dump and you're worried about pride? They just kept asking when I'd admit I was wrong. I remember one day, about 3 months in, my dad actually showed up at the hardware store. I was stocking light bulbs when a coworker said some guy in khakis was asking for me. I peeked out and saw him standing there looking totally out of place next to the paint cans. I ducked into the stockroom and stayed there until he left. I watched him from the window just standing in the parking lot for like 15 minutes before driving off. He never came back. Around 4 months in, things finally started to change. This regular customer at the hardware store, Santiago, came in all the time for different projects. One day he needed help finding a specific plumbing part. I not Only found it, but explained exactly how to install it and even sketched out a diagram. Turns out, he did home renovations, mostly kitchens and bathrooms. He said I really seemed to know my stuff and asked if I wanted to help him out on some jobs. The pay was better than the hardware store, and it was actually related to what I was learning. It felt like the first real break I'd gotten since everything blew up. Santiago wasn't anything like my dad. He didn't look down on people who worked with their hands. He was proud of it. He'd stop mid-project to show me the right way, to do something, explaining why one method worked better than another. For the first time, I felt like someone actually saw me. Not the version they wanted me to be, but who I really was. By the 6-month mark, my parents switched tactics. My mom started texting that she missed me. My dad sent a message saying they were willing to compromise on my education if I moved back home. Honestly, it just pissed me off. Like, now that I was proving I could do it on my own, they suddenly wanted to compromise? No thanks. I wasn't giving up my independence just because they finally budged a little. I finished my first year of trade school with decent grades. Turns out, I wasn't too dumb after all. I just needed to study something I actually cared about. Santiago gave me more responsibility and better pay. I moved out of the Roach Motel into a slightly better apartment with one roommate, a nursing student named Aiden. He was just as broke as me, but at least he knew how to clean up after himself. By the time I turned 19, I had my first certification and was making steady money. Not the flashy kind, but enough to buy real groceries, pay my bills on time, and even save a little. Santiago started recommending me for, been telling people. We were reconnecting that I'd just needed time to find myself. Like, no, you kicked me out and only reached out when it suited you. I smiled politely, but inside I was fuming. After the wedding, Lydia and I talked a lot about it. She didn't push, just listened, which made me open up more than I expected. I told her about that night I got thrown out, how cold it was, how I sat on a park bench with my bags until sunrise not knowing what to do next. She didn't pity me, didn't try to fix it. Just said she was proud of me for surviving it. That hit me harder than anything my parents ever said. That winter, Santiago pulled me aside after a long day of rewiring a rental unit. He told me he was planning to open a small workshop and wanted me to manage it. Said he trusted me more than anyone else. I tried to play it cool, but honestly, I went home and cried. No one had ever trusted me with something that big before. It felt like everything I'd been through, the crappy jobs, the sleepless nights, the cold showers, it had all led to something. I started taking business classes online to prepare. Lydia helped me figure out schedules and budgeting, even let me practice explaining project proposals to her so I wouldn't choke in front of real clients. Around that same time, my parents sent a handwritten letter. First time I'd seen their handwriting in years. It was this weird mix of nostalgia and manipulation. They said they were sorry if they'd hurt me, but mostly blamed the stress of work and their fear for my future. My mom wrote something like, "We only wanted the best for you." And I just sat there staring at that line. They never once asked what I thought was best for me. I didn't respond. Didn't rip it up either, just slid it into a drawer and left it there. That letter wasn't closure. It was a reminder that even now, they still didn't get it. By the time I was 25, I was managing the workshop full-time. Lydia and I were still solid, still building something real. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I was proud. Every inch of my life was built by my own hands. I wasn't the scared 17-year-old kid standing in the cold with nowhere to go anymore. I had a home. I had people in my life who cared. I had purpose. And even if my parents never truly saw me, I did. That's part 3. I'll drop part 4 soon. Some stuff went down after that which really tested how far I'd come. If you're still following this, thank you. Seriously. Means more than I can say. Inbox overflowing. It was like the entire extended family had declared a code red. My dad had even left this long, rambling message about legacy and how he'd always done his best, and now it was my turn to step up as a man. I couldn't even get mad at that point. It was just exhausting. Lydia and I sat on the couch that night eating takeout, her legs draped over mine, scrolling through messages from relatives trying to guilt-trip me into bailing my parents out. Stuff like, "Family is all we have," and "You'll regret turning your back one day." But the thing was, I hadn't turned my back. I'd just finally stopped bleeding for people who never once offered me a bandage. The next morning, I met them at the coffee shop. My dad looked older, like life had finally started showing on his face. My mom had that same forced smile she wore at every church event. They launched into the situation: mortgage, job market, the whole sob story. I didn't interrupt, just listened. And when they finally got to the part where they asked for help, I pulled out a list. Literally. A printed list of boundaries and conditions. I said, if I help, it's a one-time thing. No more guilt, no more manipulation. You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to play the proud parents in public while criticizing me in private. And Lydia? She's not optional. She's part of my life. You disrespect her, you're cut off completely. They both stared at me like I'd grown a second head. My mom started to say something, probably a deflection, but I held up a hand. This isn't a debate. This is the offer. Take it or leave it. They took it. Not happily, but they did. I agreed to cover 3 months of their mortgage. Enough. To keep the bank off their backs while they figured out their next steps. I also gave them info for job training programs and food banks. But I made it clear, this was not a lifeline they could keep pulling. This was closure. For me. A way to help without sacrificing everything I'd built. When I walked out of that coffee shop, I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel like a son coming to the rescue. I just felt free. Like I'd finally drawn the line between who I was and who they expected me to be. Lydia was waiting outside. I walked up, wrapped my arms around her, and whispered, "It's done." And she just smiled and said, "Good. Let's go home." Not back to their house, not back to who I used to be, but forward, into the life I'd fought to build. The one that was finally, fully, mine. I bumped into her at the grocery store, and she spent a solid 20 minutes fishing for information. Where was I living? What was I doing? Was I doing okay financially? That last question set off some alarms. Sure enough, a week later, my mom texted me out of nowhere. "Brady, your father and I are having a small gathering for Memorial Day. It would be lovely if you could come. Bring your friend if you'd like." Not girlfriend, just friend. Like she couldn't even admit Lydia was important to me. And the timing? Way too suspicious. Right after they'd been prying into my finances. I showed Lydia the text. She raised an eyebrow and said, "So they want something." I decided to go, part curiosity, part still chasing some closure I hadn't found. Lydia came with me for backup, even though she was like, "This has disaster written all over it. LOL." Walking into that house was surreal. Everything looked the same. The furniture, the photos, even that graduation pic now up on the wall. Same weird apple cinnamon air freshener that always gave me a headache. But I felt like a stranger, not someone coming home. Their small gathering was just my parents, my aunt and uncle, and my dad's work buddy Judah and his wife. Everyone acted like I was just their son back from college or something. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It finally did. After dinner, my dad pulled me into his study. That sacred space I wasn't allowed in as a kid unless invited. He started with small talk about how the economy was rough. Then he got to it. He'd been laid off after 27 years, replaced by some kid with a shiny degree who worked for half the pay. The irony? All those years he pushed me toward college, and now he was bitter about grads. He didn't directly ask for money, but kept dropping hints about temporary setbacks and how family supports each other. All I could think about was the night they kicked me out. My mom's smug face, sure I'd come crawling back. I told him I'd think about it. That was all I could say without exploding. Lydia and I left not long after. In the car, she just looked at me and said, "That was the most passive-aggressive dinner I've ever survived." For the next few weeks, my mom kept texting, asking how I was, whether I'd thought about what Dad mentioned, even if I wanted. Their old dining table. They were redoing the house, aka selling stuff to stay afloat. Meanwhile, my life was actually improving. I had a decent job, nothing glamorous, but steady with benefits. Lydia and I were getting serious, talking about finding a bigger place. My studio was basically a closet, and her roommate was driving her crazy. Then came the Facebook post. My mom wrote this long, dramatic update about hard times and trusting God's plan through unemployment, clearly fishing for sympathy. The comments were full of people offering prayers and love, but the kicker was the last paragraph. "We're so blessed to have our son Brady supporting us through this trial. Family really is everything." I nearly choked. I hadn't given them a cent. But there she was, publicly acting like I was bankrolling them. Relatives were praising me in the comments. "Brady's such a good son." I called her furious. She played dumb, said she meant emotional support, that people just assumed the rest. But I knew exactly what she was doing, creating public pressure so I'd feel obligated to step up. That night, Lydia found me making a spreadsheet trying to figure out if I could afford to help without screwing up my own life. She sat down, held my hand, and asked, "What would you tell a friend in your situation?" And that hit hard. If a friend told me their parents kicked them out at 17, barely kept in touch, and were now asking for money, I'd say they didn't owe those people anything. So I made a decision. I texted my mom and said I wouldn't be providing financial support, that I was still building my life and recovering from what happened back then. I shared some resources for job seekers and financial aid, the same ones I'd used. Her reply? One word. "Okay." Then silence for 3 weeks, until yesterday. My phone blew up. Texts, calls, voicemails. My parents' situation had gotten worse. Dad still didn't have work, and now foreclosure was on the table. Suddenly, it was my problem to solve. My aunt even left a voicemail saying, "You need to be the man your father raised you to be." The irony of that line actually made me laugh. Lydia and I stayed up late talking about it. Boundaries, family, guilt, and the difference between forgiveness and forgetting. I still don't know exactly what I'll do. Part of me wants to help. They're still my parents. But another part remembers standing on that lawn with my bags. My mom's so sure I'd fail. The roles are reversed now in a way none of us saw coming. Tomorrow, I'm meeting them. Just us. At a coffee shop. Neutral ground. I've got conditions in mind if I do help, and firm boundaries. Life's weird. 9 years ago, they thought, I wouldn't make it a month without them. Now they're the ones who can't make it without me. Not sure if that's karma or the universe's twisted sense of humor. I'll update after the meeting. Thanks for reading this and for the support. Final update. The day before the big investor meeting, I got a bunch of frantic calls from my mom. I ignored the first one, too much prep left. But then she called. 4 more times. Then my aunt. Then my cousin. Something was up. When I finally answered, she was crying so hard I could barely make out her words. Once she calmed down, she told me Dad had been laid off again. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. The car had died. And now they had an eviction notice. 2 weeks to come up with the money or lose the house. I just sat there in my office staring at the wall of awards and certifications I'd earned, feeling nothing. No, scratch that. I felt annoyed. After all this time, they were still pulling the same manipulative crap. And the timing, right before the most important meeting of my career. I told her I'd call her back. Hung up. Sat there in silence. Lydia walked in and instantly knew something was off. I explained. She didn't give me advice, just asked how I wanted to handle it. That's one of the many reasons I love her. I decided parents could wait. First, the investor meeting. One crisis at a time. The meeting went better than I hoped. The investors were impressed with my work, grilled me with tough questions, but I was ready. By the end, they were talking about backing more than just this project, maybe future ones too. It was everything I'd worked for since the night. I stood on my parents' lawn with nowhere to go. When I turned my phone back on, I had 27 missed calls. Not just my parents, my whole extended family. Facebook Messenger was flooded. My mom had posted again, this time about losing their house and how certain people had forgotten family. She didn't name me, but it was obvious. Comments flooded in. Brady will come through. Family is everything. I just stood there, staring at Lydia's laptop screen, watching strangers pressure me through guilt and shame. And I decided, enough. No more vague boundaries, no more occasional help, no more strained holidays. I texted my parents, said I'd meet them tomorrow. Just us, just everything we never talked about. That night I barely slept, kept playing the conversation in my head. Lydia held me and reminded me. We'd built a real life, a family. Her, our friends, people who had shown up. Whatever happened tomorrow, I wasn't alone. The next morning, I drove to their house. It looked so much smaller. Rundown, paint peeling, lawn overgrown. The flower beds my mom used to obsess over were dead. It was like their decline was written on the walls. My dad opened the door. He looked older, tired. He just nodded and stepped aside. Inside was worse. Cluttered, dusty, smelled like a place where maintenance had stopped. My mom sat at the kitchen table, eyes red. She jumped right in. Thank God you're here, we knew you'd help. I cut her off, told them to sit down. For once, they'd listen. I laid it all out. How they'd kicked me out for wanting a different path. How they said I'd come crawling back. How they only reached out when they needed something. My dad tried to interrupt with excuses. I shut him down. Told them what it was like those first few months. The couches, the jobs, the loneliness, the crying. How I had to learn adulthood by myself because they chose their pride over their kid. My mom started crying again, said they made mistakes, but they were still my parents. That family sticks together. I lost it. Where was that attitude when I was 17 and homeless? I asked. You only remember we're family when it benefits you. It circled like that for a while. Apologies followed by justifications. So I gave them conditions. 1. I'd pay the back mortgage once, just once, but after that, they'd need to downsize. 2. They had to take down that Facebook post and tell everyone they were handling things privately. 3. If they wanted a relationship, we'd start therapy. Not to fix everything, just to build honest communication. 4. My life, my relationship, my choices were mine. Future help depended on respect. I expected pushback. Instead, my dad just looked defeated, like he knew the game was over. My mom kept glancing at him, like waiting for him to fix it. Eventually, they agreed. Not happily, but they agreed. I wrote the check. Not because I owed them, but because I wanted that chapter closed. As I was leaving, my dad followed me outside. I expected a guilt trip. Instead, he said, "You turned out all right. Better than all right. Not how I pictured, but you did good." Not an apology, but maybe the first real thing he's said in years. I stood on the same porch where they'd once slammed the door on me. Finally, I said, "I know," and walked to my car. A month later, it's complicated. They've stuck to the deal. Therapy's awkward, but it's something. They're house hunting for smaller places. The Facebook mess is gone. It's not the Hallmark version of healing, but it's real, based on truth, not guilt. That scared kid they kicked out? He did okay. Built a life, found love, learned that rejection doesn't define him. And that night, lying next to Lydia, I finally deleted those missed calls. They'd been sitting in my notifications for weeks. As they disappeared, I felt it. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just peace, closure. Turns out, I wasn't the one who couldn't survive without them. It was the other way around.